This is going to be the most explosive, the most important video I have done in the entire COVID series. Come on, let's go see what I'm talking about. Hello everyone, Dr. Chris Martenson here. I am going to show you the explosive information that we have today on ivermectin. Stop the presses. This is it. We have it now. I know I've been talking about ivermectin for months and months now, but now all the data is in. There is no more excuse not to be using this. If your doctor, if your health provider is not providing you with ivermectin and you think you've been exposed or you have been exposed or you have COVID, they're guilty of malpractice at this point in time. Incendiary? Let's take a look at this and see what I'm talking about. All right, moving into the data here. Ivermectin works. This is the title of this one right here. It works. Underline. Full score. Stop the presses. Don't need any more data. It'd be great to get some more. But meanwhile, what are we seeing out there in the world? This is just headlines from today. I found these off of Reddit mainly and one off of Google there. Look at this. Look at this. U.S. reports 3,100 coronavirus deaths. It's awful. 20% more than the previous record, as long as we're keeping records that way. I'm 23 years old and I've just had a stroke. Arizona man goes viral after COVID-19 experience. The LA mayor is implementing new coronavirus lockdowns. Cancel everything, they're saying at this point in time. More Americans died from COVID-19 yesterday than on 9/11. Married couple, 50 years, they die on the same day from COVID and toll near 400,000. This is awful and preventable. That makes it doubly awful. Here's what I'm talking about. This is for all doctors out there, everybody in the healthcare provider space, anybody who's in the business of treating COVID patients, PAs, nurses, anybody, even if you're treating at home, you have to be aware of this paper that's come out. And this is review of the emerging evidence demonstrating the efficacy of ivermectin in the prophylaxis, that's the prevention of even getting it in the first place, and treatment of COVID-19. I've been on this for a long time, but thank you to these people here for putting this together. Beautiful, beautiful review. I'm going to cover just a little bit of it, just enough to make the point, but it's worth reading in its entirety. And if you're in the health space, you got to read this in its entirety. But before you do that, start giving your patients ivermectin. Full stop, just do it. All right, where are these people from? Let me get my drawing tool out here, my magic drawing tool. We've got Aurora Medical Center, University of Tennessee, Hackensack School of Medicine, University of Texas Health Center in Houston, Center for Balanced Health in New York. Where's the NIH on this? Nowhere. Where's the government? These are doctors. These are the frontline doctors. And of course, just like the people who put together the Math Plus protocol, frontline doctors are doing this. The multi-tens of billions of dollar medical apparatus at the U.S. government and also in the U.K. and in France apparently doing nothing. But that's an editorial comment for another day. Let's get now into this study. Check this out. This is a figure 2 from that paper. It says a meta-analysis, so that's combining the analysis of a bunch of different studies all into one place. A meta-analysis of mortality outcomes looking at death from clinical trials of ivermectin in COVID-19 hospitalized patients. So now we're talking just about people who are already in the hospital. So these are what we would call serious, if not severe cases, okay? So look at this, all these different studies here, and this right here is saying what's the odds ratio. If the odds ratio is 1, there was no benefit, no harm. If the odds ratio is over 1, ivermectin, of course, would have done more harm than good. Under 1, and it does more good than harm. Every single one of these studies has an odds ratio of less than 1. And by the way, this is a log chart, so this is 0.1. This means there's around a 90% or better benefit for these 3 studies down here. 90% improvement in hospitalized patients. Now, the vaccine, 95% effective. You know what the vaccine's not effective at? If you're already in the hospital. If you're in the hospital, you give somebody a vaccine, no help whatsoever, right? So how do we treat people who are in the hospital? We use this. If this is not being used, it's malpractice at this point in time. Look at those odds ratios. The worst of these, is still better than remdesivir by an order of magnitude. And this is in hospitalized patients. What happens when we look at ivermectin as prophylaxis? So these are trials where people are either in a high-risk setting, they're healthcare workers, and or they've been exposed at home. And then they've been given ivermectin before they've shown any symptoms at all of COVID. And so the question is, well, how does it work under that scenario? Look at this. Here's the odds ratio of 1. Oh my God, all of these down are clustering around 0.1 or less, so there's a 90% blockage, or better, roughly, depending on the study we're talking about, blockage of developing COVID at all. Unbelievable. This is urgently important. You need to know this, everybody. And if you're a doctor, if you go to your doctor and you say, I've been exposed, I think I've been exposed, I'm feeling early symptoms, and they don't give you ivermectin, drop that doctor, go to the next one. You got to find it right now, because this is how not only you're going to prevent yourself from maybe getting COVID, the disease, but as I'm going to show you, it goes even further than that, maybe prevents you from having all of the horrible effects that we know come from getting COVID for the long haulers and the people who have mild cases who have heart conditions and brain fog and all that awful, awful stuff. From this same meta-analysis, this is fantastic real-world data. Look at this. This is really, really critical here. So what they're doing here is they're looking at a comparison of case count decreases among Brazilian cities with and without ivermectin. So the distribution campaigns were given to cities, some with, some without. Some cities got it, some didn't. Bolded cities got ivermectin. The unbolded cities didn't, and so they matched them in terms of which region they're in, because maybe that matters. Maybe it's important. You wouldn't want to compare a southern city with a northern city. Maybe they're just different in terms of climate, in terms of spread. So they matched them in terms of region, and they matched them in terms of population. So here's a city in the south with 223,000 people in it. Here's one with 224. The one in bold got ivermectin. The one that isn't in bold didn't get ivermectin. So here now they're looking at percent of cases in August compared to June and July. 40% of the cases relative to June and July in the city that got ivermectin, and 80% of the cases, so there was still a decline, but not nearly as much. Well, that's just one city. Could be random. In the north, comparing these two cities right here, again, matched for population, matched for region. This place has 45% of the cases they had in June, July, and that's the city with ivermectin because it's in bold, compared to 67%. In the Northeast, same sort of matching, 19% of the cases compared to 62. Every single time when you distribute ivermectin in Brazil, you get a reduction, a vast reduction in the number of cases that are being reported. What about in Paraguay? They also noted that in Paraguay, again here, they're looking at case counts and deaths. This is counting deaths too. In Alto Parana, in blue, is after ivermectin distribution began compared to all other departments or regions. So in blue here, we see that this is deaths, weekly deaths for COVID. Came all the way down in places that had been distributed ivermectin. In places that hadn't, the death counts came down a little, but not nearly as much. Look at that. So we're comparing basically the experience of all of these with this one way down here. Look at that. Unbelievable. Not unbelievable, it's believable to me. And in terms of number of cases, same thing. Places with ivermectin, and let me get my red pen back, all of these places without ivermectin. So what do you see there? Pretty good, solid evidence. Again, real world data. This is measuring in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people across cities, across regions. And this is an entire country measuring against departments or regions against each other. So it works. Real world data says ivermectin works. How about for long haulers? These poor long haulers, these are people who are reporting that months after exposure and development of COVID symptoms, they still feel tired, brain fog, tachycardia, which is a racing heart, extreme fatigue, unable to walk upstairs or conduct themselves. So they write here in the report, this meta-analysis say decreasing reports of persistent, vexing, even disabling symptoms after recovery from acute COVID-19, and even mild COVID-19 to be honest, have been reported, and which many have termed the condition long COVID or long haulers, and estimated to occur in approximately 10% of cases. So if we said in the United States there's roughly 9 million cases now, well, that's 900,000 wounded people. That's more than in World War II. That's an awful statistic. Generally considered as a post-viral syndrome, they're writing here, consisting of a chronic and sometimes disabling constellation of symptoms, which can include in order fatigue, shortness of breath, joint pains, chest pain. Many patients describe their most disabling symptoms as impaired memory and concentration, often with extreme fatigue, described as brain fog, highly suggestive of the condition of myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome, a condition well reported to begin after viral infections, so this may be no different. Continuing on, they write in particular with Epstein-Barr virus, which, by the way, COVID is known to reactivate EBV infections, so it might just be damaging the immune system to the point where it allows an Epstein-Barr virus infection that was sort of fought to a stalemate a long time ago in your life to reemerge because you're so weakened. All right. Although no specific treatments have been identified for long haulers, a recent manuscript by Aguirre Chang et al. From the National University of San Marcos in Peru, where they are using ivermectin, reported on the experience with ivermectin in such patients. So I think that's the reference there. They treated 33 patients who were between 4 and 12 weeks from the onset of symptoms with escalating doses of ivermectin, 0.2 milligrams per kilogram, that's 200 micrograms per kilogram for 2 days if mild, 0.4 milligrams or 400 micrograms per kilogram for 2 days if moderate, with doses extended if symptoms persisted. They found that nearly 88% of the patients' resolution of all symptoms was observed after two doses with an additional 7%, so bringing us up to 95%, reporting complete resolution after additional doses. Long haulers, you finally have an answer. If I'm a long hauler, you know somebody who's a long hauler, if you feel like you have symptoms, they're not going away, ivermectin, and it's not that hard. These are very, very safe doses to be taking. It's a very well-tolerated drug. There's no reason not to try this if you're in a long haul situation. The number of complications that arise from ivermectin, tiny. So talk to your doctor about this, and if they can't help you, find one who will, because this is important. This is your life. Don't accept squat from an ignorant person in the medical system. And by the way, Fauci's ignorant and the NIH is ignorant for not including this. Still to this day, this information is not included in their treatment guidelines at the NIH. It's beyond malpractice at this point. I'd call it criminal. It's that bad. Those people all deserve to lose their jobs. Editorial comments over. Now let's get back to the science. All right. So this is another way which a very simple place found at ivmmeta.com where they've collected. This is different from the study we were just talking about, the other meta-analysis. Different website, different everything. But what they've done is they've made a very handy, easy chart table for us to look at all these different studies that are coming through, and they're adding to this as new studies are coming in. Love it right there. Looking at the treatment time. So we got early treatment, late treatment, pre-exposure, post-exposure, prophylaxis. The number of studies reporting positive results, so it's 3, 12, 4, and 2. And total number of studies, 3, 12, 4, and 2. Hold on. That means 100% of all the studies in early, late, pre, and post-exposure prophylaxis are reporting positive results from that. What would the odds be of that just being due to random chance? Like ivermectin doesn't actually work. All these studies just randomly came up with that result. Well, if you just looked at these first early treatment studies, just 3 of them, about a 1 in 8 chance that those 3 could all come back positive. Once we have these next 12 for late treatment, it's about a 1 in 4,000 chance that that's due to chance. If we just look at these right here, you get a 1 in 16 chance for those 4 studies. And sorry, I misspoke a tiny bit. So this is 1 in 4,000 just for these 12. These 12, 1 in 4,000 that those 12 studies all returned 100%. That's fantastic. And 1 in 4 chance that these 2 studies, post-exposure prophylaxis, return their results. But if you put all those together, you put them all together, you put all of those studies into one spot, all 21, you have a 1 in 2 million chance that this is due to chance. Like no chance, this is chance. You get that? This is just like, oh my God, and look at the improvements. 91% improvement, a 60% improvement, a 98%, an 87%, an overall 75% improvement across everything. Early, late, severe, mild, pre, post. At every possible stage, ivermectin is delivering a solid result. Compare this to remdesivir, which barely returned any result at all. And it was all over the news, and they couldn't stop talking about it, and Fauci's like promoting it, and it was junk. It was garbage. All it did was cut 2 days off of the average hospital stay for some people who had this much oxygen flow, but not this much. It was junk. They fished till they found that stupid result. Doesn't work. Didn't work. That's fine. Not everything has to work, but consider the amount of attention and intention that was put behind promoting that. by your media system, which is totally bought and paid for, by the way, by your media system, which is unable somehow to wrap their heads around results like these, which are as clear as day. So if you cared about helping people, that's what I do. That's why I do what I do. I care about you. I care about helping people. I care that science matters. I care that we can make sense of the world and add 1 + 1 and come up with 2. I care that we can have a shared experience of life where we could both look at data like this and say, this is meaningful and we should do something with that. I don't have any good reason for why the media can't manage to get their heads around this particular thing. But by the way, 100% of the time, ivermectin works, which sets it apart, by the way, from my favorite clip from Anchorman here, sets it apart from a certain pheromone perfume, which...
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
Wait, one more time. I love this. Let's do it one more time.
They've done studies, 60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
So, unlike this pheromone perfume, 100% of the time, it works every time. Ivermectin. I deliver this to you for your perusal and consumption. All right. So this is looking at that same metadata, but putting it on a graphical format. If you don't like tables, some people like the images. I like the images. So this is, again, the hazard ratio of 1. Anything on this side is an increased risk. Anything on this side is a decreased risk. And now you can see how every one of these studies sort of fell out. And by the way, early treatment, just 90% reduction in risk if you have early treatment. So ivermectin ought to be given prophylactically, early as possible. Of course, just like any antiviral, it's going to do its best work as soon as possible. You want to get it into you as soon as possible. When it's given late, obviously it still has some benefit on these studies out here. But like anything, if you give it too late, like you can't, like let's just imagine they gave ivermectin to people who had just died. Obviously, no benefit's going to show up there whatsoever. So the earlier, the better. The earlier, the better. The earlier, the better. It's pretty obvious, and I'm surprised we have to be saying that here in December, but people are still confused by that out there in the medical world. All right, so this is the summary from that those tables and those images we just looked at. You can read them yourselves. I'm just throwing them in here because I thought it was pretty good, but showing that the probability that ivermectin is an ineffective treatment is actually 1 in 2 million, so almost no chance that this is due to nothing. Hey, let's have another real-world experiment just in case, because I was tracking this one for a while. Way back in July, there was one state in Mexico that said, we're going with ivermectin. And so they say here, the Secretary of Health in the state of Chiapas announced in the house-to-house campaign is going to begin to detect positive cases in the Ministry of Health. And they actually get to call themselves a Ministry of Health. Why? Because they indicated this campaign involves the house-to-house visit of medical brigades whose purpose is to find positive cases of COVID-19 and provide 10,000 drug kits that include ivermectin, indomethacin, azithromycin, paracetamol, oseltamivir, and calcium. Wish it had vitamin D in there. Doesn't matter. They had the magic ivermectin. And this treatment will be for 7 days. So they're going to have 7 days of treatment. So, gosh, I wonder what's your prediction based on everything we just saw? What would your prediction be for what the result would do? How would we look at that? Let's imagine we could look at all the different states in Mexico and ask the question, how many people, let's normalize for population. So how many people per 100,000 in all the states in Mexico are now dying from COVID, right? That would be a pretty good test. Hey, fortunately, we get that data right here. Total COVID deaths before July 31st, so this is before their campaign could have taken effect. You can see here deaths per 100,000 people. Green is better, red is worse. It's a spectrum. The state of Chiapas down here, but you can see all these different states. They have numbers that are ranging from maybe 20 or 30 on up to over 111, 117 there. But look at this, total deaths after July 31st. This is the only state that's down here in the green zone. Pretty compelling, wouldn't you say? I would say it's compelling enough that we would say we have to take this pretty seriously. All right, Let's check in with Romania. In Romania, just an article just came out on December 3rd. That'd be today. COVID-19, ivermectin, the drug with up to 90% effectiveness, ignored by medical authorities. So it's already starting to cause a stink in Europe as well, where people are going, hey, what's going on here? And they say here in recent weeks, several randomized controlled trials, which are supposed to be the gold standard, we're supposed to listen to those, have concluded that ivermectin is effective as a treatment for COVID-19. It is an antiparasitic molecule. It's used primarily to fight scabies, which is not even a virus or a bacteria. It's an actual little tiny organism. According to a meta-analysis of all known studies in hospitalized patients, treatment with ivermectin in the hospital reduces the risk of mortality by a factor of 3 or even 6 if we limit ourselves to randomized trials which are less biased studies. So even if we just throw out all the other studies, we only want randomized controlled trials because that's all we'll allow ourselves to consume. It reduces the risk of mortality by a factor of 3 or even 6. All right. That's why I say right now, if your healthcare provider or any healthcare provider is not using ivermectin, it's a form of malpractice at this point in time. That it's not being promoted at the national levels by various health managers, not authorities, because you lose the moniker of an authority if you can't manage to improve health using the tools at your disposal, right? I mean, that'd be like you go to a doctor, you have an infection with a bacteria, and they've got antibiotics on the shelf, and they choose not to use them because they're going to think positive thoughts your way and maybe rub something, a lotion on there that's based on cow intestines, right? That would be malpractice, right? Because you would use the tools you have available, right? Well, that's the equivalent right now. As far as I'm concerned, the NIH is basically in the business of sending positive vibes and cow intestine juice. That's where they're at. All right, this is the summary right now. Ivermectin works as pre-exposure, works as a post-exposure prophylaxis. It works in early stage COVID, late stage COVID. It seems to improve the lives of long haulers and reduces their symptoms, which means it probably, notice in the green, I'm emphasizing this word probably here, I'm speculating, it probably prevents long haulers in the first place. That would be a good guess. It probably prevents or limits other damage for the mild cases. So this would be things that would develop into long haul symptoms or the other damage that we're seeing in people, cardiac damage, things like that. And it probably prevents or limits other damage in severe cases too. These are probables. We'd love to see the studies coming about all this, but we should have studies around that. All of which is to say, you got to use the Math Plus protocol. There's a protocol out there. It's designed by medical professionals. You need to have this. If you're a medical provider, if your doctor or your hospital is not using this, bring this to them. Drag them to this particular website link that I provided for you. And again, all the links are down there in the description below this. But give them this protocol and tell them that they have to run this with you or your loved ones. You don't give a crap what their policies say. And if you're stuck in a place that's in the dark ages, rubbing magic cow juice on you, instead of using the Math Plus protocol, I'm very sorry. Switch hospitals if you can. Switch doctors. Do what you have to do. It's that serious. It's time to, we're on our own now. We've been failed comprehensively by our national health manager. So guess what? Individual doctors, like all those great good doctors who put together that meta-analysis review and the people who put together the EVMS Math Plus protocol. So here's what it is. If they've got a prophylaxis protocol, look at what's right at the top of that. Ivermectin. Of course there is, right? And there's the dosages you would want on there, and they've got vitamin D3, vitamin C, quercetin, which helps the zinc, which is next on the list, get in there, and of course melatonin, which helps as an important immunomodulator. I 100% subscribe to that Math Plus protocol. Okay. I would kind of up their vitamin D from 1 to 3,000 units a day to 4 to 5,000, personal preference. I would add selenium, another trace mineral, a trace element, 200 micrograms a day, and B-complex vitamins, all of which each one of those has, there's data behind each one of those claims to say that these things can only help, can't hurt. And on the early outpatient protocol, I would also, they've got vitamin D3 at 4,000 units a day. I'm okay with that. Maybe it could be a little higher. Actually, scrap that. Get a blood test, and if your vitamin D levels are below that 21 nanograms per mil cutoff, just wallop yourself with vitamin D, tens of thousands of units to get up as high as you can, because you'd really rather be over 40 in this story. All right, but beyond that, Again, that's all I would add. A little selenium, some B-complex vitamins, but really we're nibbling at the edges. The big thing is, of course, to get the ivermectin in there, period. All right, if we were all using the Math Plus protocol, this becomes a wall of unnecessary fear, unnecessary death, unnecessary suffering, unnecessary cancel everything culture going on. I have no explanation for why some people are attached to this, like why they want to have this be the outcome. It's a mysterious thing to me, but it's not a world I want to live in, and I don't think you should either. So listen, you know what this channel is all about. We're all about using data and following the data, and when the data changes, we change. Yeah, I can't tell you. The number of times I've had people say, you were all about fearing COVID back in February, and you sound different, and I can't follow you. That's fine. The information we had in February was very different from the information we have today. Didn't know about ivermectin in February. We had images of people keeling over in the streets in China. You know, it was we didn't know what was going on. So we sift through the data, we do the best we can, but you got to be able to pivot and pivot quickly when the data changes. So the data's all in. We don't need more time to pivot. I don't need more time. You don't need more time. The doctors shouldn't need more time. Ivermectin is the bomb. The only people who might not want us to have ivermectin are those who would profit from headlines that look like this. That's all I can tell you. You know, as Charlie Munger, the right-hand man of Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway said, he said, if you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. We're humans. Humans are incentive-based creatures. There are a lot of people whose incentives are aligned with this wall of unnecessary fear. I get that. They can be that way. You don't have to be that way. I don't have to be that way. We're free still, luckily, for a little bit longer, hopefully, to be able to make up our own minds and to go through the data and see what it says. But for now, we don't need more data. We can fill it in, get a little bit more, run a few more studies. But for now, it's very clear. Ivermectin is the magic bullet in this story. And if you're a long hauler, you've got to get yourself some ivermectin. By hook or by crook, get yourself some as soon as you can and see if that helps improve your symptoms. And by the way, we're going to be following that as we go on through this and taking a look at that because I really want to help those people. It sounds miserable to be in their condition. So that's it. That's all I have for today. Thank you very much for listening. Let's just hope that I can say all of this and not get deplatformed by the Ministry of Truth or whatever the equivalent is out there right now because I'm just trying to help. It's just data. Unfortunately, there are people who don't like either of those things right now, and that's the world we live in. So that's all I got. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye.